I always knew my family saw me as the outsider, but I didn't expect them to humiliate me on the day we buried. The only person who ever treated me like I mattered. My name is Lena Marshall, and for the last 3 years of my grandmother's life, I was the one who fed her, helped her bathe, changed her bed sheets, and sat by her side during the long nights when her heart condition made her too scared to sleep alone. My relatives, Aunt Marjorie, Uncle Rick, and their spoiled children, Chloe and Brent, visited only when it benefited them, usually around holidays, or when they wanted to show off their family values online. Still, even though I knew how selfish they were, I believed that the truth of our relationships would become obvious during the will reading. I thought, maybe for once, fairness would win. The attorney's conference room smelled faintly of old books and lemon polish, and the wooden table was so polished I could see my reflection in it. Everyone shuffled into their seats with an air of entitlement, chatting casually as if we were waiting for a brunch reservation instead of the distribution of my grandmother's life's work. Marjorie wore a dramatic black hat and kept dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, even though she hadn't shed a single real tear all week. Rick leaned back in his chair with the smug confidence of someone already imagining himself holding the deed to Evelyn's house. I sat quietly at the end of the table, my palms damp, trying to steady my breathing, when Harold Keene, my grandmother's longtime attorney, began reading the will. The room fell silent. His voice was steady, respectful, carrying the weight of decades of service to my grandmother. Things started normally as he announced small, sentimental items, some jewelry to Aunt Marjorie, vintage books to Uncle Rick, but I noticed Harold's expression tighten slightly the further he read, as if something about the document unsettled him. My heart began pounding harder with every line, both from grief and anticipation. I didn't need anything extravagant from my grandmother, but she had told me again and again, "Lena, you'll be taken care of when I'm gone." Then the moment came, and to my granddaughter, Lena Marshall. Harold paused, his brow furrowing for a fraction of a second before he continued. "I leave no designated inheritance." The word slammed into me like a punch to the chest. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I stared at Harold, waiting for him to correct himself, to say he misread something, to announce there was an amendment or an additional clause. But he didn't. He just closed the folder gently, like he was afraid of looking at me. A cold, heavy silence filled the room before it was shattered by the sound of Chloe stifling a laugh. Aunt Marjorie turned toward me with an expression that was supposed to look sympathetic but came across as mocking. "Oh, Lena, dear," she said, patting my hand with fake comfort. "I hope you understand." Mother was very clear that she wanted things to go to those who were truly involved in her life. The irony nearly made me choke. I had been the one by Evelyn's side every single day, while Marjorie rarely visited without a camera in her hand to prove she'd checked in. Anger and disbelief twisted inside me so intensely I felt nauseous. Uncle Rick leaned forward, his voice dripping with condescension. "You can't expect to be rewarded for... what? Living rent-free and doing a bit of caretaking?" he scoffed. "We all do what we can for family." Brent and Chloe snickered quietly, exchanging glances as if the spectacle of my humiliation was some kind of entertainment. My throat tightened so much it hurt, and I could feel my eyes burning as I fought the urge to cry. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction. When the meeting ended, everyone stood to gather their small items and congratulate themselves. As I collected my bag, Harold approached me, his expression troubled. His voice dropped into a whisper. "Lena, please don't take that will as the final word," he murmured. "Your grandmother was very specific about her intentions. Something about this doesn't sit right." His words froze me in place. I looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of false hope, but he seemed genuinely concerned. I walked out of the building feeling hollow, the cool afternoon wind biting at my cheeks. The others were laughing behind me, their voices echoing across the parking lot, bragging about who got what. I tried to ignore them as I unlocked my car, but their voices carried anyway. "Of course she got nothing," Chloe sneered. "Grandma wasn't stupid." Their laughter rose behind me, sharp and cruel. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, and for the first time since Evelyn died, I let myself cry. But as I wiped my tears, one thought surfaced, quiet at first, then relentless. Evelyn promised me something, and she never broke a promise. The days following the will reading felt like walking through a storm I couldn't escape. Every time I stepped outside, it was like the world whispered about my humiliation. My relatives wasted no time spreading their twisted version of events. By Monday morning, half the town had already heard that I was disinherited for a reason. My phone buzzed nonstop with thinly veiled condolences from people who had never once asked how my grandmother's final months actually were. And every time I opened social media, I saw posts from Chloe and Brent hinting that karma had finally caught up with me. It was infuriating. But worse than that, it was confusing. My grandmother's promise, replayed in my mind on a loop, refusing to let me accept what I'd been told. I couldn't shake Harold's expression from my mind either. He wasn't just sympathetic, he looked alarmed. His whispered warning echoed in my head over and over. Don't take that will as the final word. It made no sense. He had been my grandmother's attorney for nearly 20 years. He knew her better than most of our own family did. If he thought something was wrong, then something was wrong. And deep down, I knew it too. Evelyn had been meticulous, organized, and painfully aware of how my relatives behaved when money was involved. The idea that she would leave everything to them and nothing to me didn't just feel wrong, it felt impossible. On Wednesday afternoon, I decided I couldn't sit in my house drowning in unanswered questions anymore. I drove to Harold's office, hoping he could clarify what he meant. The building was old brick with ivy creeping up the side, a place that usually made me feel grounded. But as I climbed the steps, my stomach twisted with nerves. What if I had misinterpreted him? What if I was clinging to false hope because the truth hurt too much? Harold greeted me himself at the door, his usually calm face instantly tensing with concern. "Lena," he said gently, "I've been expecting you." He ushered me into his office and closed the door behind us before sitting opposite me at his desk. "I couldn't say much at the reading," he began carefully, "but something was wrong with that will." I leaned forward. "What do you mean wrong? You read it, didn't you draft it?" Harold hesitated. "I drafted several wills for your grandmother over the years. She liked to update things as circumstances changed." He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick file with Evelyn's name written neatly across the top. "But the will that was read wasn't the most recent one." A chill ran down my spine. "How is that possible?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out," Harold replied, lowering his voice as if the room could be listening. "The document we read was filed correctly, signed, notarized, and dated. But it wasn't the version your grandmother approved last." He tapped the file. "She updated her will 6 months ago. And in that version, you were the primary heir. You were left the house and a substantial portion of her assets." My heart slammed against my ribs. A dozen emotions, relief, anger, confusion crashed into each other at once. "So where is the real will?" Harold shook his head. "That's the problem. The updated will is missing from both my office records and your grandmother's safe at her house." He frowned. "And Lena, only a very small number of people knew where that safe was." Images flashed in my mind, Marjorie lurking around Evelyn's room, Rick volunteering to help organize her belongings, Chloe snooping through drawers under the guise of looking for photo albums. My stomach turned as suspicion curled in my chest like smoke. "You're saying someone removed it?" "I'm saying it didn't disappear on its own," Harold said gravely. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My grandmother trusted that safe. She trusted Harold. She trusted me. She absolutely did not trust the rest of the family. Harold leaned back in his chair before continuing. "I'm going to search my archives again. But I need you to do something as well. Go through your grandmother's house carefully. She may have left a clue. She often left notes for herself when she changed things." A clue. The idea sparked something inside me, cutting through the fog of humiliation and grief. Evelyn always left breadcrumbs for herself. Little reminders, hidden notes, messages tucked into recipe books, coat pockets, or empty tea tins. It was entirely possible she'd left something behind that would explain what she'd intended. "Okay," I whispered. "I'll search the house, every inch." Harold reached across the desk and placed a gentle hand over mine. "Lena," he said softly, "your grandmother loved you deeply. If she took the time to make a final will that protected you, then she expected it to be honored. People may underestimate you, but Evelyn didn't. Don't let this go." I nodded, my eyes stinging. For the first time since the will reading, I felt a spark of strength. I left Harold's office with a mixture of fear and determination swirling in my chest. As I walked to my car, a black SUV parked across the street suddenly caught my attention. Inside sat Aunt Marjorie, her face twisted in a scowl as she watched me intently. When our eyes met, she didn't look away. She just smirked. My stomach dropped. Whatever happened to that real Will? My family was more involved than I ever imagined. Driving to my grandmother's house felt different this time, as if every tree lining the road leaned inward, listening. The keys trembled slightly in my hand when I unlocked the front door, but stepping inside hit me harder than I expected. The air still held her scent lavender tea and old books, and it nearly brought me to tears. My relatives had ransacked the place after the funeral, claiming they were helping sort things out, but I'd been too emotionally drained to stop them. Now, walking through the house with Harold's words echoing in my head, every displaced object looked suspicious. I had a gnawing sense that something important was waiting for me. Something Evelyn had hidden deliberately. I started in her study, where she kept her most personal belongings, and immediately noticed the disorder they'd left behind. Papers were stacked carelessly, drawers sat half open, and the rug had been rolled back, as though someone had checked beneath it. I forced myself to breathe through the anger and focus. Evelyn wasn't careless, which meant anything out of place had been moved by someone else. I went drawer by drawer, checking for any sign of a note, a message, or a document tucked where it didn't belong. After nearly an hour of fruitless searching, doubt crept in. Maybe Harold was wrong. Maybe I was, too. But then, I remembered something: Evelyn's sewing room. No one ever went in there except her and me. It bored the rest of the family. If Evelyn wanted to hide something, that room would have been her safest bet. I made my way down the hall and pushed open the door. The familiar smell of fabric, cedar, and old thread washed over me. Everything was still, almost untouched, except for one small thing. The footstool beside her sewing table had been shifted. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but Evelyn never left anything misaligned. I knelt down and moved it aside, and that's when I heard a faint click beneath the floorboards. My heart jumped. I pressed my hand flat against the wooden planks, tracing the edges until I felt the tiniest seam. Carefully, I lifted the loose board, and there it was. A metal box, small enough to be hidden but heavy enough to hold something valuable. My hands shook as I slid it out, brushing off dust. A thin label on top read, in Evelyn's handwriting, "In case they interfere." My breath caught in my throat. My family hadn't just manipulated things, they'd done exactly what she feared they would. I carried the box to the sewing table, sat down, and opened it. Inside was a folded letter, a flash drive, and a sealed envelope with my name written across the front in her steady cursive. My eyes blurred with tears as I lifted the letter first. The paper was soft, aged, and unmistakably hers. I unfolded it carefully, afraid it might tear from the weight of what it contained. "My dearest Lena, if you're reading this, it means something has gone wrong. Please trust yourself. The people around you are not who they pretend to be. You must take what's in this box straight to Harold. Don't let fear stop you. You were meant to continue what I've built. With all my love, grandmother." My chest tightened so sharply, I had to set the letter down. She knew. She knew my relatives would interfere even before they did. I picked up the flash drive next and plugged it into my laptop. A single folder appeared. Heart, Will, Final. Inside was a scanned document, Evelyn's true will dated 6 months ago, notarized and unmistakably real. It left me the house, the savings, the land, and full oversight of her charity fund. My name was everywhere. I felt dizzy reading it, like the gravity of the world had shifted around me. But the sealed envelope, that felt even heavier. I opened it slowly, revealing a small handwritten note and several printed photos. The note read, "If they question your truth, show them theirs." The photos were of Rick and Marjorie entering Harold's office building late at night, clearly taken from a security camera. My heart pounded as I flipped through them. They hadn't just forged the will, they'd stolen the real one. A sudden knock at the front door jolted me upright. The sound echoed through the quiet house, cold and sharp. I peeked through the window, and the sight made my blood freeze. Rick was standing on the porch, and he wasn't alone. Marjorie and Chloe were right behind him, their faces hard and expectant, as if they already knew I'd found something, as if they'd been waiting for this moment. The moment I saw Rick, Marjorie, and Chloe on the porch, my entire body locked up. Their presence felt predatory, like wolves circling after catching a scent. I closed the box quickly and shoved it into my bag before stepping toward the door, forcing my breathing to steady. When I opened it, Rick pushed forward as if he owned the house, his eyes narrowing at me with a smugness that made my skin crawl. Marjorie hovered behind him with that same pinched expression she always wore when she was pretending to be worried. Chloe's arms were crossed, her gaze sharp and unblinking, like she was trying to read my mind. Rick didn't even wait for me to speak. "What were you doing in there so long?" he demanded, glancing past me into the house. "We came to finish clearing out Evelyn's things. You're taking too long." His tone carried that usual mixture of entitlement and resentment he never bothered to hide. I felt a flicker of anger spark in my chest, but I held firm. "This was her home," I replied slowly. "I'm taking the time it deserves." Chloe scoffed under her breath, rolling her eyes. Marjorie leaned in slightly, her jaw tightening. "You don't need to go through everything," she said pointedly. "We've already handled what matters." My pulse quickened. They were checking to see if I'd found something. I could feel it radiating off them. The tension, the urgency, the fear hidden beneath their arrogance. I stepped out onto the porch and closed the door behind me, blocking their view. "I'm done here," I lied, hoping my voice didn't betray the panic fluttering in my chest. "I was just getting my last things." The three of them exchanged looks, silent and unnerving. "We'll be back later," Rick said finally. "There are some documents we need to look for." I felt the meaning beneath his words, like a blade pressed against my ribcage. They knew the real will existed, and they were terrified I already had it. I waited until their car disappeared down the road before running to my own, clutching the bag like someone might rip it from me. My hands trembled as I drove to Harold's office, rehearsing what I'd say, preparing for the confrontation that now felt inevitable. When I arrived, Harold ushered me inside immediately, his face paling when he saw the box. "You found something," he said, closing the blinds as though he expected someone to be watching us. I handed him the letter first, then the photos, then the flash drive. With each item he examined, his expression shifted from shock to anger to the unmistakable resolve of a man preparing for battle. "We're filing a formal challenge today," Harold said, standing abruptly. "This is fraud. They tampered with legal documents, broke into my office, and attempted to steal an inheritance. We'll bring this before a judge immediately." Hearing those words sent a rush of relief through me, but also a wave of dread. My family wouldn't accept this quietly, and I wasn't naive enough to think they'd back down without making things ugly. Still, as Harold drafted the petition and gathered expert witnesses to verify the authenticity of Evelyn's signature and the date stamps on the real will, a sense of clarity started to settle inside me. Evelyn had trusted me with the truth. Now it was my turn to do something with it. 2 weeks later, the probate hearing began. I arrived early, clutching Harold's notes like a lifeline. The courtroom felt colder than I expected, its wooden benches and fluorescent lights casting an eerie stillness over everything. When my relatives walked in, Marjorie shot me a look of pure venom. Rick carried himself like a man who thought he could intimidate his way out of anything. Chloe wore a smug expression that didn't match the situation, clearly believing this would end in their favor. But when Harold presented the contents of Evelyn's hidden box, their confidence began to crack. The judge leaned forward as the forensic expert explained the discrepancies in the forged will, how the ink differed, how the signature pressure was inconsistent with Evelyn's typical handwriting, how the notary stamp showed signs of tampering. The room grew tense as Harold described the missing will, the suspicious timing of filings, and the photos showing Rick and Marjorie entering his office without authorization. Chloe's smug look vanished. Marjorie's mouth tightened into a thin white line. Rick shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his jaw working furiously. But the moment everything shifted was when the judge asked directly, "Mr. Hart, why were you inside the attorney's office after business hours?" Rick opened his mouth, then closed it, then tried again. His voice cracked as he muttered something about paperwork confusion. But the judge wasn't buying it. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Harold leaned toward me, whispering, "This is going in our favor." For the first time in weeks, hope wrapped around me like warmth returning to frozen skin. Still, there was one more piece of evidence on its way. Harold had hinted at it but refused to tell me until it arrived. And just as the judge announced a short recess, the courtroom doors opened. A clerk hurried in with a small envelope labeled with the attorney's office seal. Harold stood, took it, and smiled in a way I had never seen before. "Your grandmother," he whispered, "left us something none of them could have anticipated." And I knew, in that instant, the final blow was coming. When Harold opened that envelope, the room seemed to tilt, as if the air itself shifted in anticipation. I sat completely still, gripping the edge of the table as he carefully unfolded the document inside. His eyes scanned it, and I watched a slow, almost astonished smile stretch across his face. The judge noticed it too. "Mr. Keene," he said, leaning forward with measured curiosity, "is there something you'd like to share with the court?" Harold nodded, stepped to the center of the room, and lifted the paper, as if presenting the final piece of a puzzle that had taken weeks to understand. "This," he announced, "is a sworn statement written and notarized by the late Evelyn Hart, stored in a separate sealed archive box that was just recovered by my staff." He looked directly at my relatives, whose faces were already paling. "Mrs. Hart specified that this statement should be opened only if a probate challenge was filed or if the will presented at her passing appeared inconsistent with her last known intentions." A ripple of hushed voices spread across the room. The tension seemed to thicken, and even the judge straightened in his seat, sensing something monumental. Harold cleared his throat and began reading aloud. The entire courtroom fell silent. "To whom it may concern, especially if my grandchild Lena is seated in the room while this is being read," he began, his voice steady and deliberate. "I am writing this because I know my family. I know what some of them are capable of when money is at stake. If you are hearing this, then I need the court to know that my final will was updated 6 months before my passing and reflects my true intentions." I felt my throat tighten as he continued. "I have taken precautionary measures to ensure that if deletion, tampering, or forgery occurs, it will be discovered. I trust only Harold Keene and my granddaughter to carry out my wishes." My heart pounded as Harold read on. Evelyn listed, in specific terms, her concerns about Rick's sudden interest in her finances, Marjorie's push to rush legal paperwork, and Chloe's attempts to obtain copies of older wills. For nostalgia's sake, each line hit like a hammer, building a case stronger than anything I'd expected. At one point, Marjorie buried her face in her hands, shaking her head in disbelief or maybe shame. Rick stared at the floor, jaw clenched, while Chloe looked as though she wanted to disappear. But the final sentence was the one that changed everything. "If this letter must be read, I ask that the court honor my true will and pursue legal action against anyone who attempted to violate it." The room erupted into murmurs again, but the judge quickly silenced them. He leaned back, exhaled deeply, and began rifling through the documents before him. The real will, the forged will, the forensic reports, the photos, and now Evelyn's statement. It took him only a short moment before he delivered the decision that would shape every life in the room. "The court finds that the document submitted by Mr. and Mrs. Hart is fraudulent," he declared, his voice echoing sharply. "The authentic will, dated 6 months prior to Mrs. Hart's death, is hereby reinstated." He turned his gaze toward me, softening slightly. "Miss Lena Marshall is the rightful primary heir to the estate." Then his tone hardened as he faced my family. "As for the fraudulent filing, appropriate legal proceedings will begin immediately." The sound of the gavel hitting the bench felt like thunder. Marjorie gasped. Chloe began crying loudly, and Rick muttered a curse under his breath. It was surreal watching them unravel these people who had mocked, belittled, and dismissed me for months now, scrambling for excuses. Rick tried to plead ignorance. "I thought she wanted us to handle things. I was trying to help," he insisted, but the judge shut him down immediately. Chloe looked at me through watery eyes, her voice trembling as she whispered, "You don't understand. We needed that money." I felt no satisfaction in her desperation, only clarity. I stood slowly, my hands trembling but my voice steady. "I took care of her," I said. "Not for money, not for gain, because she was my grandmother, And you all treated her like a bank account. A hush fell over the room. Even the judge seemed to pause. For the first time in this entire ordeal, they looked ashamed. The legal process stretched into the following weeks. Rick was charged with document tampering and breaking into Harold's office. Marjorie faced civil penalties, and Chloe and Brent were barred from accessing any foundation funds. Evelyn's house, her property, her assets, they were all officially transferred to me. But the biggest blow wasn't financial. It was knowing Evelyn had seen through them all along and trusted me to protect her legacy. On the day everything finalized, I stood in her sunlit garden, holding the original letter she'd written for me. The wind rustled through the lavender she loved so much, and for the first time since her passing, I felt her presence not as a memory, but as a warm, steady certainty. Justice wasn't just served. It was written by Evelyn herself, and delivered exactly as she intended.